Now, according to Marseilles Incorporated, this little dongle can act as a replacement graphics card for your Nintendo Switch. To say I was a touch skeptical about that, yeah, I'm a touch skeptical about that. Welcome back to SwitchUp. If you enjoy the content, consider subscribing. Let's have a little look at the Marseille. Can it act as an inline graphics card? Well, let's find out.
For $100, the MClassic claims to be able to upgrade the graphics on, well, any of your game's consoles, but how does it work?
It's essentially an inline custom chip which can take the HDMI signal of a console and, using its own built-in software, filter the signal in supposedly less than a millisecond before pumping it back out to your TV, looking nice and crispy and with none of the aliasing that we're used to. Now, this is a post-processing technique. That means it's not happening in the console itself, it's happening after the graphics have been rendered. So it could potentially work out. So the first test we're going to look at is The Witcher 3.
Now, even when you zoom in quite far, there isn't a huge amount of difference here. What we do notice is a massive increase in contrast as well as a drop in brightness. Now, that being said, even with The Witcher 3's dynamic resolution scaling, when we zoom in a great deal, about 800%, you can see a difference on this building here. It's not massive, but it's definitely there. However, when you're zoomed out, again, the only real difference is the contrast, and even zoomed in on the brooch there, we can't see a great change. Now, having said that, to my eye, I do prefer the crispness of the MClassic's version. And as you can see in the background, the hill is also smoothed out. Let's move on to Mario Kart, and the difference here is much more stark, perhaps attributed to the fact that the game's running at native resolution. You can see when we zoom right into the areas and crossfade, using the MClassic on the left, we can see a stark difference. The jaggedy lines around the edges of most items are sheared almost completely off. And when we zoom right in, my goodness, the difference is quite surprising. Now, when we head over to Assassin's Creed, just like with The Witcher, it doesn't do quite as well. Contrast is increased, brightness drops down, but you have to zoom in almost 1000% before you really see any difference. The image on the left hand side is with the M cable, and the image on the right is without. Could you tell that if I hadn't said it? There's definitely an improvement here, but it's very subtle. Again, it could be to do with a lower resolution. Spintires Mud Runner, and it's another example like The Witcher where not having native resolution does affect its ability to work, but as you can see, it still does quite a good job, particularly when you zoom in really close up on an item. When you're just playing the game, you do notice a difference. It does look sharper, and it's much more noticeable over a large scale TV on a native resolution title.
You essentially get a box and the card. What comes in the box? Well, nothing much over here. You've got that. You get this small dongle which looks a little bit like this. It looks a bit like a USB key, but it's got a HDMI at one end, and there's a power slot and another HDMI input on the other side. You will need to power this with a USB cable that comes in a nice bright red colour. What it aims to do is to use post-processing anti-aliasing as well as some upscaling if you want to render your Switch images in 4K without the usual horrible blurry mess that produces. Now, unfortunately, just due to the nature of my laptop, I couldn't really give you a good example of how it works with the 4K upscaling, but it works. It actually makes quite a big difference, which is a surprise. Again, it seems to always work best when it's using a native resolution game. The Switch, you really notice it when it's blown up over a big screen, when it's those jaggy edges, and anything that makes the slightest difference to that, in my book, is a bit of a win. So Marseille, fair play, you have done a really good job here. But I actually think it might help a few people out, particularly like me who've come from PC and just crave perhaps a slightly crisper image. The Marseille does that. The contrast boosting and things like that, they make a nice difference, but again, you can kind of recreate that using just your settings.
And whether or not it's worth $100, well, it really depends on the end user. But if you've got a giant 4K screen, or if you just don't like the jaggies in native resolution games, it might be for you.
If you enjoyed the content, then consider subscribing, and as always, a big thanks to our patrons. For all things Switch all the time, keep it Switch up. Cheers guys, I know Glen wants to hear it. See ya!